All right. All right. Well, it's really nice to be here. I hope that I've asked Melissa to do a mic check for me beforehand. I've heard from people sometimes that the mic on my laptop doesn't pick up my voice super well. So either Melissa hopefully will just interrupt me if need be, or
I will
Stacey
if there's a
will.
problem.
Great, thank you, thank you. So if we were in person, I would be, y'all would see that I'm a pretty relaxed presenter. I'm happy for us just to have a conversation, to be sort of informal about the whole thing. But I know that over Zoom, of course, for logistical reasons, sometimes it is good to have harder rules about when we're asking questions or putting stuff into the chat. So Melissa is going to be helping me since I'm by myself doing the like making sure that I'm not missing any questions in the chat. But that being said, I do ask that you stay, much like she said at the beginning, kind of stay muted, just so there's not any bad feedback from people's laptops or got dogs in the background or whatever. They don't interrupt us too much. But otherwise, feel free to unmute yourself at any point you have any questions. And I will be going over the agenda as well, so that certain things might get covered. But again, I'm building in a little bit of time at the end for questions. I'm also happy to discuss things as they come up. So it was really nice to meet all of you. As I said, I'm Emily Williams. I'm with the South Carolina Migrant Education Program. In 2012, I graduated from College of Charleston with bachelor's in Spanish and Latin American Caribbean Studies. I was a Student Action with Farm Workers fellow. I don't know if there are any other SAF alumni on the call. I was placed out in Cullowhee, North Carolina with the Vecino Farm Worker Health Program. 2013 to 15, I was working with the East Coast Migrant Head Start Project, who are really, really important partners with us here in South Carolina still today. We love East Coast, so if y'all have this Migrant Head Start in your area, I highly suggest that you work with them. I was a family services coordinator with them, and then I got my master's in human rights in Madrid, and then started working with the South Carolina Migrant Education Program in really, really great to be with you all today. That's just a little bit about me. And just so you know, all these pictures on the slides are real pictures of either ourselves, like these two pictures are of me, teacher Noah's fly class, just a random picture of me, as well as all the other ones will be actual pictures of either our staff or interns out working with students and families. So just a little reminder before we get started, right? You can use this to see what you can adapt you can use all of this to see like what can you adapt or replicate in your state. I'm not saying that just how we do it is the only way to do it or that there aren't other ways of doing things. Just try to have an open, flexible, and creative mindset when it comes to these ideas shared. I recognize that not everything will be able to apply to everybody all the time. But hopefully you'll come away with at least one strategy that you think you might like to try, or a way that you think you could improve an internship, maybe thinking outside of the box of where you could get interns from. Obviously, you need to keep in mind what your own program needs, and that, right, all South Carolina migrant education programs have something in common, which is that we're all a little bit different. That's something I've really enjoyed about the job, is learning about other states and how other folks do it, depending on your students and your numbers and where they are and who they are. Everything is a little bit different about all of our programs, which I think can be a strength and is interesting, but it does require you to be flexible and creative in your thinking when trying to cherry pick from other programs. So today we're going to go over just briefly kind of what South Carolina structure looks like. Again, like I was saying, since all programs I feel like are a little bit different, I personally find it very helpful if states share how they're set up, because then that gives me an idea of like, okay, yeah, they're much bigger than us. So it sounds like in some ways, maybe their local service centers are closer to how we do our state program. We're like, okay, it sounds like they do their services very differently than we do, but I can still glean something from their IDNR, or even if it is just very different in general, maybe I can replicate something that they're doing in their whole state in just one region, right? We're going to talk about what makes a good internship, do's and don'ts. Where could you pull from to get these interns? And some of the places either that we have ourselves gotten interns or ideas of where you could get them. Should you pay them? Should they get a scholarship? Do they get class credit, right? How do we compensate these interns? How do you plan for the interns? Onboarding, if you're onboarding them onto your team, what do you need to include for that? Tips on keeping it fun. I'll have some time for questions and there'll just be a couple of closing reminders. But if at any point during this, if we're talking about paying and scholarships and class credit, and you really want to get a conversation started with the other participants, I'm totally open to, some of y'all unmuting and us having that discussion. And then I know that I'm going to be also trying to keep up along with Melissa with the chat to the best of my abilities at any rate. So as we get started, this is our South Carolina structure. So we are divided into 3 regions. Each region has what we call a liaison and a recruiter. So I think we're all familiar with what a recruiter is, but a liaison in our case would be then the person who's not necessarily a certified educator, but they do follow up with the families. So they're following up with our K through 12 students and families, sometimes the OSY, depending on whether or not it's kind of like a here to work H2A OSY, in which case that's usually the recruiter doing follow-up classes, or if they're more like a OSY, they're part of a family or is trying to sort of settle out into the community. So they're helping them find their resources, connecting them to their needs in whatever county they happen to be living in, kind of helping them keep up with anything going on with school, coordinating with tutors if they're going to end up needing tutoring, that sort of thing. And I know that I said opening session that we did a rehaul of our IDNR and services, and this is the big overhaul we did. So I'd be glad again to talk to y'all any time in a different presentation about kind of how we did that and why we think it worked. So the reality, though, of course, as always, we're all over underfunded, overstaffed, or not have enough staff, too much to do, right? So reality is Region 2 doesn't actually have a full-time recruiter right now. The recruiters in other areas of the state, as well as myself and one of our program coordinators, we all take turns of recruiting that section of the state. So we have to do a lot of coordinating and talking about, okay, who's been here, who's been there, who's been to which camps, so that we don't accidentally go over each other too much. And then Region 1, which is that blue part of the upstate, we actually only have a part-time liaison. So again, that looks like sometimes staff having to say like the recruiter.
You have a question.
Oh yeah, what's the question in the chat?
It says, do you go into the schools at all?
Not really. We're very, very field-based, which is good and bad. It's good that we're very strong in the field, but I think that it can be bad sometimes because I think we miss a lot of students and families. So like if they're working on a farm in South Carolina, we got them. And if they obviously came to us as an M6 referral, we got them. We might even have them if they used to do farm work and we just got lucky and they happened to be at the trailer park we were doing door-to-door recruitment at or the apartment or whatever. But we are working on getting school referrals. Hopefully we'll have that starting in the fall of this year. But we've never really gotten school referrals before that. So if we are in the schools, it's more like because maybe there was an issue, or if it is a school that has a high concentration of migrant students, we might go and volunteer for like a parent night or something like that so that we can kind of help the school and also see our students. But we're not school-based in the slightest. Even before the pandemic, we all worked from home. My office, this is not my office, I'm at a different office. I usually am just on the road in my car with the backpack. So we're very field. And what do we use for photo permissions? Do we have it on hand? So what we do for photo permission is on our COEs. We've started adding a consent for pictures to be taken. And then we also though practice informed consent as well. So we're taking a picture. We're probably going to use it like stuff like this, like for training materials, which always, that gets a weird facial expression sometimes from families and students. But we'll either explain we're going to use it for this, or we might post it on our Facebook. We might use it internally. We might use it on a flyer, that sort of thing. So we make sure that they know that we're taking a picture of what we're going to use for it. So even they don't have to check the box in order to be in the program, obviously. And we tell them that when we're doing the COE of like, hey, this is what we would take a picture for. Is it okay if we use your pictures? Yes, no. And they can always take that back later. Like if we're like, hey, we're gonna take a picture, like, this one down here on the bottom kind of middle corner where you see one of our staff members taking a family to go get their second round of COVID vaccines. We might say, hey, we're gonna take a picture to promote getting the vaccine. Is that okay with y'all? Or we might use the picture later for some other reason. And they'll say like, yeah, that's fine. So we do get photo releases that way. I hope that answered that question. Oh, it sounds like I'm cutting out a little bit, so I'm gonna try to hover. Yeah, if you didn't get a chance to see it, Victor and I yesterday presented a little bit on our social media policy, and that is part of what we did was throwing a checkbox on that COE, which is very easy to do on the eCOE. You can just contact whoever your rep is at MIS 2000. Hopefully, I'm in a better place for the mic, so hopefully I'm not cutting out too much. So I'm going to go back to the structure, but that's a good question about the COE. So given, right, this is sort of what our structure is. So like, where could an intern really help? In our case, we decided to have the interns focus on recruiting OSY in families, and especially because in the summer, this tends to be in South Carolina, at least at these camps, where it's like if you live at this camp, you're working on a farm. And so those COEs are very easy because it's usually moved from Florida to this camp to, harvest watermelon, to harvest tomatoes, to pack peaches, whatever it is, pretty easy. And then we also get them to provide services to the big OSY camps as well as some of the small ones, and to the pre-K through 12 students in non-project areas. So there are a couple of places where we have high concentrations of students like Beaufort, Colleton, Charleston, the Florence area, and Greenville. That's where we have a lot of K through 12 students. So they tend to we push out money to districts and nonprofits in those areas. So they run summer programs. But then, of course, that leaves a lot more of the state or parts of the state that have high concentrations of OSY, where maybe there's no local program that wants to pick up an OSY program. So then we have, in addition to our staff, we also have the interns out doing that. And we're actually going to pilot this summer using one of the IDRC like educational kits and using the portal. So hopefully that will also improve our interns. And then we also do our live Facebook English classes. And during the summer, we have the interns doing that every week. So that kind of gives our staff a break from having to keep up with those in the summer. And it's just something else for the interns to do that they can get creative with and seem to enjoy. So now that we're kind of talking about interns, right? And like what kind of things we should be looking at for interns, do you mind sharing in the chat and or unmuting if you feel comfortable about it? Maybe like raise your hand before you unmute or something, just to make sure everybody who wants to talk gets a chance, not talking over each other. Have you ever been an intern? And if so, do you mind sharing a few lines about it? Was it fun? Was it boring? Was it disappointing? So definitely when I did my fellowship with Vecino's Farm Worker Program, I was not an intern. I was an intern. I was a fellow, but I was basically an intern. And it was really fun. And I feel like I got a lot of opportunities to practice skills and to really almost feel like a member of the staff, but also very supported. So it was a really good experience. And I've made some mistakes myself in supervising interns, especially when like the very first time I ever supervised interns after college. There were definitely a couple times where I was like, I probably could have done a better job supporting them. Nancy, you said you were never an intern, but you did student teaching, so that might count. I think that absolutely counts. Anything really as far as like interns go, I feel like where you were maybe not actually training to be a staff member, but you knew that you were just going to be there temporarily for the purposes of learning, but also contributing to the employer, I think would count under the larger umbrella of intern. Does anybody else want to share their experiences in the chat or on mic and share? I see that there are 80 of us. Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Emily.
Hey.
So I actually did an internship in 2012. I think that's where I met you. I also did the student action with farm workers internship. I'm from New Mexico, so it was a pleasure to go out there and explore, and help the farm workers in North Carolina. I was placed in Hendersonville, and with the migrant education program, I didn't do COEs or any data, but I did provide services to OSYs and also students that were moving from Florida to North Carolina. And that's how I pretty much ended with working with migrant education here in New Mexico. After that experience, I also went back to do another fellowship for 6 months in North Carolina and with a clinic, and that also helped me a lot. Now I have a better idea of what other states or how North Carolina works, and so yeah, definitely I think it's a great opportunity that you get interns and you might get possible new recruiters or staff that works for MEP in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing all that, Bernardo. Yeah, Bernardo and I were in the same intern class. So see, you get interns and then they come back to you later, even if it's in a bigger cosmic way. And in fact, somebody else started to say something. I don't know if they put it in the comments. I'm going to read the comment while we wait to see. Alejandrina says that she started 3 years ago as a teacher assistant and met summer camp, and she fell in love with the program that way. So see, everybody starts. Did somebody else want to say something? I feel like I heard somebody start to unmute and talk. No, we're all good. Okay. If you think of something later that you want to add, as we're talking about other parts about being internships, where you're like, oh yeah, that actually reminds me, I wanted to share about, this, that, or the other experience that I had that's relevant to what we're talking about, I'm perfectly happy for us to stop and talk about it there. Okay. So what makes for a good internship? So I'm actually going to start with the avoids and then go to the do's, even though that's not the way that you're going to read the screen. But we're just going to talk a little bit about what you want to avoid or be cognizant. So a classic example, right? Making copies and getting coffee. Now, this is not to say that you can never ask them to like pick up the coffee on the way in, or you can never ask them to make a single copy, right? Like I've gotten coffee for our staff members. I've made hundreds of copies of flyers and sat there and folded them. So this is not about so much, can you ever, if you ever have them make a photocopy of anything, now it's a bad internship. And this one time, they had y'all were working on something and you knew they needed to go do something to help the team. And so you said, would y'all mind? Here's like the petty cash. Can y'all go grab everybody a coffee, or can you go run to the grocery store and get another bag of coffee, out of the petty cash, or however it works at your work, right? That's fine. We all have to do that sometimes, but you don't want to have it like just we don't know what else to do with you. We're like, oh yeah, go on a coffee run, right? Because if they applied for this internship, whether it be, depending on the method that they're coming at it from, it's because they think that the migrant education program that you work for is interesting. It's because they want to know more about working in education. It's because they want to know more about farm workers, right? There's some reason why they're there. And it probably, if they wanted to make coffee, they probably would have gotten a job at a coffee shop, right? So this is something you want to think about is remembering like why did they probably apply for this internship, and how can I kind of shield them from having to do too much of the stuff that really isn't relevant to what they're trying to learn about. Obviously, you want to avoid busy work, really in general, even if it's an paid employee. I know that I hate busy work. We all hate busy work. So again, if you don't have anything to do, like you have nothing for them to do to some degree, just saying, honestly, I have nothing for you to do. I didn't have time to plan this, that, or the other, depending on where they are in their internship. And we can talk about that later. Feel free to go home for a couple hours, or like, I'll when it's time to meet up for outreach, go ahead and go home, right? Not just having them kind of sit there and twiddling your thumbs just so you can see you filled their hours. That's really kind of back on, myself or whoever it is as a supervisor to make sure that you have things for them to do that are appropriate and have some means to an end, even if it is something boring, like folding all of the, if even it's just folding all of your brochures, like that is important and somebody does need to fold. You also would want to avoid sending them out without preparing them. Can you fully prepare somebody for the world of migrant ed? Probably not. There is some part of it where they just kind of got to get out there and try it, but you wouldn't want to just shove them out there and say, all right, good luck. Yeah, just go out there and talk to those kids. Yeah, like you don't know what kind of, even if they have experience doing educational activities with the kids, or even if they have some experience in tutoring, they still need to know sort of what are your expectations? Is there any particular curriculum they're supposed to be using? What does it look like when you go and do this, or some other staff member that would be usually doing it? What does it look like when they go out and do it? Because along with that, you don't want to treat them just like any staff member. I can say from my own experience, both as supervising interns and having been an intern somewhere, it is great when you feel almost like one of the team, as far as they seem to trust you with bigger projects, or with, kind of letting you figure out your schedule or your work. They also don't want to be completely unsupported, because we got to remember they are an intern. They are not a staff member, so you can't quite have the same expectations. Like I think Bernardo briefly touched on that. He was providing services through the North Carolina Migrant Education Program, but he wasn't doing a lot of the data stuff. He wasn't filling out COEs. And I'm not saying that you can't have them fill out COEs. We have had students fill out COEs, but you need to know kind of ahead of time, what am I realistically asking them to do? And then how can I prepare them and treat them with respect without just making them feel like another staff member who isn't necessarily learning on the same. I feel like as a staff member, you have kind of longer amount of time to learn things in some ways. I mean, when you're in an internship, if you've only got 2 or 3 months or weeks or something like that. And so you're maybe trying to learn something specific. You just want to keep that in mind. You also want to avoid, if at all possible, asking them to wait for reimbursement. Of course, I realize this is very situational, and this depends so much on your staff and how things work. Are they, do y'all work off of per diems ahead of time? Do they have to wait and submit receipts? Can they get a per diem, but it's after the trip, whatever it is? Especially when you're talking about young people who are maybe just out of high school, or maybe still even in high school or in college or something like that. They might not have that buffer money in their account. So if they need to spend, $100 on food because they've been recruiting outside of the usual area for a week and they couldn't, do a normal grocery shop like they would at home, and it's going to take a month and a half for them to get that money back, that really might really unbalance them, especially if we're talking about in the summer when they might be needing to make some payments for the next semester and stuff like that. So if you can find out, just be cognizant of that and figure out some way within your staff to make that work. Either like making an exception to get them that reimbursement, sort of like to get them that per diem ahead of time, maybe figuring out some, totally kosher with everybody in your HR departments, obviously, process, like saying, okay, I'm going to front them the money and then they're going to, Venmo it back, whatever it is. But you do want to be sensitive to the fact that they might not be able to just shell out, a couple $100 for a rental car and then wait a couple months to get that money back. They very well might not be able to do something like that. And then I would avoid waiting until the end of the summer for a feedback cycle. So of course, like at the end of their time, and I say summer because that's sort of the default time that you imagine doing an internship. But you don't want to wait until the very end as your only space for doing feedback. Of course, it's good to do it at the end of their internship to say, all right, let's talk about, from our perspective, what went well, what areas you can work on, that sort of thing. You also would want them to feel comfortable giving you that kind of feedback, but I wouldn't just have it at the end. We'll talk a little bit more about why. So what you do want to do is you want to plan. I think anybody who supervises regular staff also is aware of how incredibly important it is to plan. That's really what knocked me off my feet the first time I supervised interns, was just how much of my time needed to go into making plans to support them and to have them around. So that's what I would really suggest to you, is make sure that you've planned enough things so that if you go out to that camp and they're not there after all, you need to schedule in for yourself or for whoever the supervisor is going to be, or if y'all are all maybe they have one main supervisor, but the whole team is going to help plan for them. You just can't over plan for interns, is I guess what I'm trying to say. You also want to think specifically about what you want them to do. So Bernardo talked a little bit about his experience working with the North Carolina Migrant Education Program back in 2012 when he was an intern. And so he wasn't doing COEs and he wasn't doing certain types of data entry. He was mainly working with, I think you were working with mostly like students who wanted to get their like high school diploma, their GED, something like that, wasn't it, Bernardo? Or did you work with general K through 12 kids? I can't remember. You can either unmute or chat it, either way.
Hello, sorry, Emily, I didn't get a question.
Oh no, it's okay. I was just saying I couldn't remember when you worked for the North Carolina, when you did your internship for the North Carolina program. I know that you said that you weren't doing COEs or like much data entry, but were you working with, in fact, I remember you were working with like either OSY who wanted to get a GED or high school students who wanted to get a GED. Was that pretty much the scope of y'all's tutoring, or did y'all also tutor K through 12 kids? I can't remember.
No, we just did, we will provide transportation to the GED classes. At that time, I think it was more in person rather than virtually. So we provided transportation, and we also provide tutoring to, if they needed help with a class and study for exams. And we also will take them to the college to take the exam. And then we will also work with students like K through 12 students or high school students, I'll say, on and helping them with the pass package, the one that Florida provided at that time. I don't know if that's, so we will help them with we will work with Florida to get that package going, and then we would meet with the student and help them do the lessons that they have to do, the class that they have to do, the assignments. And then whenever it was time for the test, we will also, send that to Florida. The results, whenever the student will take the test, we will send it back. And then we also translate it for them. We also did like presentation about financial aid for college. And we took them to the library there, the local library, to do that event and to answer any question in regards to the university. Mhm.
Wow, thank you. That was a lot of detail. Thanks. I appreciate that. So you want to think though specifically about what all you want them to do. There's so much they can do, but you can't really realistically only have them for a certain amount of time. We're not talking about like a year-long intern or several years. Think specifically about what you want them to do and then kind of use that as your guide of like, okay, so what all do they really need to know? What else would just kind of be extra information? You want to give them opportunities to practice what you want them to do. So even if that is something like just driving them to this place and getting, just driving a student somewhere and getting them, into the center they need to be in on time and all that kind of stuff are skills they need to practice about. Okay, well, now I need to know how to troubleshoot that, build in 10 or 15 minutes in case there's traffic and this place is actually kind of hard to park at. And this person's usually late. So I need to make sure I call them the day before to remind them about the appointment, whatever it is. Even some things that we might find boring or routine could be interesting or helpful for them. I had a couple interns once or twice who were really interested in even just kind of the day-to-day, like planning that I have to do and scheduling. So like I had them schedule a meeting one time, which I find pretty boring, but they were kind of excited about it because that was a skill that they had never gotten to practice before, like coordinating with people's schedules, using doodle polls, like looking at calendars, sending out a professional sounding email. Some of these interns you have might be real young. They might be in high school or early college, and these are just skills that they've not practiced yet. Maybe they've worked at an ice cream truck. They've babysat kids. They might have even done tutoring for their school, but they might not have done a lot of just kind of office administrative work, which we all know is important to know how to do no matter what position you have in the world of education practically. So just keep in mind that there might be some things that you think are boring or routine that could be interesting or helpful for them. Even if it's not going to be a main scope of what they do, they might enjoy getting to practice doing it once. The classic I always like to think of is the I do, we do, you do. This is something we implement with our families and students as well. If I'm trying to work with a parent who's new to the US and not very familiar with a lot of systems, maybe I'll practice with them a couple times. Like, okay, we're going to call this clinic together. We're going to press 2 for Spanish. If they don't answer, we're going to leave a voicemail with our name, what we need to talk about, and the best phone number to call us back on, that sort of thing, right? So do the same thing with your interns. You maybe you're gonna go out and you're gonna recruit at a camp, like so say for us, right? I have interns fill out COEs as well as do services. So they need to know for sure how to show up at a camp, do a recruit, and then do a quick English class for the H2As, right? Like that's pretty classic evening of outreach for us over here in South Carolina. So I'll have them do that. Maybe I'll do it one day and they're just kind of following me and watching me do this stuff. And maybe they might help if they feel comfortable with it. The next time, maybe we're going to do it together. So they're going to help me find the people. Maybe one of them is going to help me fill out a COE or sort of I'll ask them like, hey, like I'm going to tell you the structure of the class, but you are going to be the one writing it down. And then maybe the next time I say like, all right, your turn to write the COE, your turn to plan the class, your turn to get out of the car and introduce us. And it depends on your interns. I've had interns that takes them, a week or two to kind of feel more comfortable with doing. It's also really nice if you can switch them up and have them. So even if you are their main supervisor, letting them have controlled times to work with other staff members, I think is super important. Yes, Bernardo. Bernardo, I should have just gotten you to co-present with me. Let's just make you an official presenter.
Another idea that came to my mind is that as part of the internship, we had to work with a student to to do like a small film or a small video about his story. So we asked an always white student, and he, we took some pictures. We went with him to the fields, to to the apple orchards, and we write we did a small video and pictures and write his story. So I think one thing that maybe an intern can do, students now, they know technologies. You have students that are really well in editing, so maybe you get a student that is good at that. I mean, you can get them to choose a student and make a video to promote the migrant education program and how it has helped to get their GED or in school. So that's just an idea that came to my mind in regards to my internship.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thanks so much for sharing. And the rest of y'all too. I know that Bernardo is going to be now my unofficial co-host here, but really and truly, I'm happy for all of y'all to talk notes. So yeah, so like you want to have them reach out and work with other staff members so they can kind of see like, okay, so and so approaches this differently than Emily does, and I kind of like how they do it, and also just kind of normalizes it. That's what usually ends up happening with our interns is that they get a week-ish training with me where we go over just a lot of the general orientation stuff, and we'll talk about onboarding in a little bit. And they have a day or two off, and then we end up doing an internal like group recruitment sweep, usually within like the first 2 weeks of the interns coming on. And so then they get to go out with different staff members. And so then it becomes very normal and regular of like, okay, this is a thing. You just get in your car, you drive out here, you talk to these people, you get this stuff done. Like, this is normal. All right, I can do this. You do want to have regular scheduled check-ins. I like to have one-on-ones and group check-ins if need be. So like this summer, I'll have 2 interns. So I'll schedule in time for all 3 of us to check in as a group, and then I'll have a little bit of one-on-one time. That way, in case one of the interns wants to talk about something that maybe they don't feel comfortable talking about with their other intern partner, especially if there is any intern partner drama, which usually there isn't, but sometimes it might be, or even just kind of budding frustration, you can sort of give each person space to talk about it and they're not put in an awkward position. And usually the one-on-ones are super short because they feel like they've been able to talk about what they need to with the group. But I've had some times where maybe one of my interns was just feeling very impacted by something she or he saw with a student or family. Maybe the other intern didn't seem to have as much trouble processing that, or just whatever. There are a lot of different reasons why somebody might want to have a one-on-one with you. And then you do want to explain any rules or norms of the workplace, whether that be, we don't call each other on Fridays, or you need to always text somebody a day in advance if you want to switch shifts with them, or, just whatever the rules and norms are in your workplace. Is it okay to, be relaxed with these community partners, or certain community partners a bit more uptight than others, just whatever it is. You want to explain those rules and norms of your workplace. Maybe it's fine to wear jeans to outreach, but if you need to go to the central offices for some reason, they prefer that you work, that you dress in a certain way. Whatever it is, you just want to make sure that they're aware of that at the beginning of their internship, or possibly beforehand if necessary. So where do we find these interns? South Carolina Migrant Ed mostly receives interns from Student Action with Farm Workers. So I did Student Action with Farm Workers, as did Bernardo. So you see, we churn out some quality folks there with SAF. And so there's a link to it. As of now, SAF only places students in South and North Carolina, but they might either be able to refer you to a similar program in other states, where you might encourage your students in your other states to apply to the Student Action with Farm Workers internship. A lot of their interns come from farm worker families themselves, and I personally love it whenever we get an intern who's from a farm worker background, because that's one less thing I need to train them on. Then I'm just training them on like COEs and the specifics of our work, but I don't need to worry too much about all the core training as well on like farm worker issues and cultural sensitivity things to look out for and whatever. If they're already from a farm working background, a lot of times teach them that. If anything, they can teach our staff. You also might consider working with local universities. This is something I've also done in the past through a semester. So they might have look through for relevant departments. Obviously, like the Spanish department is, usually if the majority of the students and families you're working with are Spanish speaking, you might consider, oh, thanks for putting that in there, Melissa. You might consider getting, somebody obviously from the Spanish department if the Spanish language is the majority of the language your families and students speak. But you also might even think about pulling from people who are studying teaching, maybe even political science, like the arts. We one time had a student come and do a project where they took pictures, again, with families' permissions, but they took pictures as part of their photography class. And then the families were able to have family portraits for free afterwards. Like, we found somebody who would donate the money to get them printed, and the student got to use their high quality camera and do whatever. So it's not, a natural fit when you think like, oh, migrant ed, who should we pull? Teaching Spanish, something like that. But people from the arts can be super fun. We've also had, when I worked at Vecinos, we had student interns who were from the physical therapy department. So they were coming out and working a lot with H2A workers and the parents around different ways they can try to protect themselves at work. It being such a physical line of work, and even providing some physical therapies or on the spot kind of like therapeutic massages and things like that, which the students and families greatly appreciated, and isn't, necessarily the first thing you think of when you think of migrant ed, but can be a great collaborator. And even from your community colleges, and we don't want to leave them out. The universities and the community colleges are both great places to pull from. You can also think of different student unions that your local universities and community colleges might have. Again, especially those community colleges are sometimes in these very rural areas, so they might be very open to either forming a long-term internship program. Like I said, maybe the physical therapy department at your local community college would be interested in creating some sort of, maybe their students have to have a certain amount of hours of extern practice, and so you can figure out a way for that to work into whatever y'all are doing this summer. There's so many different ways you can be creative. Again, the hard part is the planning up front to make it happen, but the actually having it happen is pretty easy and can be very, very flexible and creative. We don't have a camp program in South Carolina. I don't think they have camp in North Carolina, so I know not every state has one, but if you do, that can be a very, very easy and fun collaboration, is getting a camp program to set up either during the regular school year, where maybe they're going to mentor students as sort of a way of giving back, because a lot of camp students are also foreign migrant education students. Or you could have them working with you in the summer as sort of a way for them to transition into, how can I give back to my community and maybe do a type of job that's not farm work, that does use my degree, right? Great full circle moment for a lot of those students. And you can even use former MEP students. They're likely already familiar with the program, even if not from the administrative side. And they would probably have a lot of those core competencies, again, around like cultural sensitivities, understanding the population and their hours, understanding, having just like a deep understanding and appreciation of how hard the work is. And they would, again, likely already know a lot of those kind of things, probably already be fluent in at least one of your target languages that you're trying to hit. So that would be like a trickier one as far as figuring out a way to have them be an intern, especially if they're not attached to either like university or an official intern program, but there's definitely ways of working around that and making that happen. So what do we do? Are we going to give them money, or is it going to be a scholarship? Is it going to be a class credit? We have experience with all three of these options from the Department of Ed here in South Carolina. So either what we do is our students from Student Action Farm Workers get a monthly stipend and a small scholarship at the end of their summer that's set up through staff. So we pay a certain fee in order to receive staff interns, and part of that fee goes to paying their monthly stipend, and then at the end of the summer they get the scholarship through staff. But whenever I've coordinated with one of the local universities, College Charleston, in the past for students to come and help out at the program, they usually have gotten some sort of class credit. So either it was like an independent study, or it was a part of a bigger project they needed to do for their class. So somehow they're getting class credit for the amount of time that they're spending with you. You can even set up some sort of scholarship they receive at the end of summer, which I know can be a better fit, especially for those of you who migrant education programs are run out of nonprofits. I managed to even do that one time where I had this intern. They were all going to work with us for a couple weeks, a couple years ago, one summer. And so I had a local group that wanted to donate money in a certain way. So we just had them basically be like the people who were going to give our intern scholarship at the end of the summer, as like a thank you for having completed X amount of hours of service. So think outside of the box. Again, like it's much easier, like for us, where we just give staff we pay for our interns and then they get paid through staff. And it's a lot easier that way. But there are creative ways that you can work. Again, it's just a matter of getting all that front work ahead of time and figuring out who's your contact, how are you going to make it happen, how do we make sure that it's all above board and legal and correct, and I'm not accidentally doing something that's going to look shady from the outside. But once you kind of put those into place, I would especially encourage you, especially if the first year it's successful, to try to keep it up. It is also much easier to maintain one of these kind of relationships than it is to have to start every single summer, every single semester with a new idea of how you're going to do your internship. So if you can kind of come up with one or two sort of steady year after year ways of doing it, the maintenance of a program like that is still something, but it's way less than having to start over every single time with a new professor, with a new department, with a new university, right? What you don't want to do is just having them work this summer, this semester, whatever it is, for no other benefit. That would make them a volunteer. They're no longer an intern if they're just volunteering. And obviously you're going to ask different things of interns and you are volunteers, and that's a whole other presentation, right? But what you want to avoid is just having them come and do hours and hours and hours of labor that are not compensated in any way. So we've talked a lot about planning for interns. So some of the things that I like to think about whenever I'm planning for the interns we get in the summer is, are they doing a full 40 hours? In which case you might have to help them manage those hours, since migrant ed especially can be so flexible with those. I would personally rather plan for them to do more things than have them sitting around. Like, I would rather get to the end of the week and be like, we didn't make it to this and this camp, but we'll try again next week, or we'll add it to the, next time we're in this area's list, than to be like, okay, it's like 9 p.m. I didn't plan enough for y'all, and now y'all are just going home early. That's a bummer. I could have, if I'd done a little bit more planning ahead of time, I could have had them hit up 2 or 3 more camps on their way home. Sometimes even as they build confidence, again, something that I've seen with interns in the past, you can get to a point in the summer where you can just leave them a daily and sometimes even weekly objectives and just let them figure it out. So with almost all my interns, I've gotten to the point where, again, they've been able to do either a daily and by the end of the summer, a weekly, where I just say, you just need to get to these camps, you need to get to these families. We've already established what your working hours are, what your work week's supposed to look like. Y'all figure it out. And I've even had them, my interns last year were they're always so great, but they were so great. I think it was maybe the second, third at the most week that they had been going. And in our little group weekly check-in, they said, we feel very comfortable with the work and with our expectations, and we feel like we know what we need to do. Would you be okay with just giving us the list of all like the camps and families for the week? And then we can decide, do we want to go here on a Tuesday? We'd rather go there on a Wednesday, whatever it is, they can kind of figure out logistically for them what makes the most sense. And I said, I would love that. Sounds great. Here's the list. So then I just had to give them their weekly list of what needed to happen. And to some degree, they would even tell me then at our little group meetings of like, well, we already went, talked to so-and-so, doesn't seem like we need to follow back up, or we went, they seemed like they really needed a lot more help. Can we go back next week, whatever? And so even as a team, we're making their weekly list. But at the beginning, they might really need you to spell it out for them of like, you can go to this camp, and you can go to that camp, you can go to this one. You also need to think about who, with whom and where and when are those regular check-ins going to be. They can be very short sessions. Like I said, they're usually like, I would plan maybe 30 minutes for our group check-in and 15 or less for the one-on-one. So sometimes if there wasn't a lot to talk about as a group, especially at the beginning, when I've been going out with them every single night, and one-on-ones, they really didn't have much to say. We're in and out in less than an hour. Especially now with virtual, it can make it very easy to say like, hey, instead of y'all coming, just meet with me on the internet. But sometimes they would rather come in person. So either you got to figure out, all right, I work from home. Am I comfortable with having them come to my house? Do I want to meet them at wherever they're staying? Do we have some sort of central offices where we want them to meet us? Maybe they need to like pick up and drop off supplies, right? You just want to think about all that kind of stuff. Again, these sessions can be short, but I think it's the regularity of it that we find so successful, more so than like how packed are the sessions. How unsupervised do you need to be? Do you need them to be able to be? Maybe they are never ever going to go do any work without being directly live supervised by a staff member. For us, it's very important that they are able to be out by themselves at some point. I don't know if you've ever found yourselves at work being like, if only I could clone myself and I could send one of me out to do this English class and I could keep one of me here to work on this, or one of me could be teaching this class while the other of me works with the student. That's what you can do with interns. Clone yourself. So usually by week 3, I like to have them out alone, in quotes, only together, because of course, a lot of us, I think staff members of different migrant education programs are accustomed to doing recruiting or services alone. We never send, there are different HR reasons, we never send interns out completely alone. So they're always either out with another staff member or out with their intern partner. But I do need them to be able to go out and do an evening of outreach or of services without me by week 3. So just depending on kind of how our check-ins are going, how I notice they're doing when we're out at the camps, sometimes they don't really need a lot of pushing. And some of them by week 3, I kind of really have to be like, okay, tomorrow night, I'm going to send y'all to these 2 or 3 camps separately. I'll be down the road at this other one. We can meet at the gas station before we all go to our separate directions. I'll be nearby if you need anything, but I'm not going with you. And then others of them, like I say, by the 4th day of their internship are fine. And I can tell they don't need me. And so I'm like, okay, great. Can't wait to send you out by yourselves. Of course, you want to run a background check and run it over with your HR department. So since South Carolina interns are technically volunteers, just for HR reasons that I'm not super aware of, but because they're working with children, they still need a background check. So that is also something we have to think about at the beginning of the summer. Like I just got my I send off packets to them for all the different stuff they need to sign before they even come on. And now I'm going to have to run all their background checks this week just to make sure that they're good to work with kids. Knock on wood, we've never had anything come up that wouldn't allow them to work with kids, but that is something you'll want to think about ahead of time rather than having them start on their first day and then going, ooh, we needed to run a background check on you. Well, you've started, but we can't really actually have you doing any of the work yet. Just assuming that you want them to work firsthand with kids. Maybe whatever it is that you want your interns to do does not require, maybe you just want them to improve y'all's website and to work on y'all's H2A mapping and stuff like that, and they'll never see kids, and so you don't need a background check. But if they are working with kids, you do want to make sure they get a background check. I can send y'all every year. Our onboarding looks a little bit different just for all the reasons, but I do have a general skeleton that I go off of and some things that I like to do that are different. So especially because as more and more people feel comfortable going online, we've been doing more and more hybrid. The first, obviously in 2020 was almost all online. Last year was kind of a hybrid year. I think this year will be too, as far as sometimes them just doing their trainings online and sometimes coming in person. So I like to have some of it online, some of it us in person, either practicing filling out COEs, bringing them out of the camps, and then even having them kind of do read on your own, almost like homework time. And of course, you got to rope in other staff to help you. The interns will get very tired of hearing my voice by the end of the summer. So I try to make sure that they get a chance to hear from other staff. Maybe I get some other person to talk about balancing your life and work, or reviewing. Maybe I've trained the interns the first day on eligibility, but the second day I want some other staff member to do a review. And again, I might not give them the world's trickiest eligibility scenarios, because I know during the summer, 90% of the people they're going to see are recently arrived from somewhere else to the state of South Carolina to do agricultural work. Like, it's going to be very cut and dry and easy. So again, you just want to think about, what do you really need them to understand how to do? What sort of things are like interesting about the program that maybe they can get like a brief overview about if they want to, and what do you really need them to understand? So like I say, we focus mainly on COEs, and then teaching them a couple of activities and mentoring kind of curriculums that they can use for our K through 12 students, as well as 2 or 3 of our just kind of classic OSY classes that they should be able to just churn out and do at the drop of the hat in their sleep practically. I do try to spread out their onboarding over a whole week, so that way you can maybe do like COEs and scenarios a few hours every day, but over several days. Same kind of stuff where we might go back and sort of touch back on a subject that we saw at the beginning of the week towards the end, just to kind of really help them remember it as we go along. I find that works better than when I was trying my exact address. That's hilarious. I don't live there anymore, but anyway. So yeah, so you'll just want to think about that. Think about, like, it might be better for me to let them kind of have that information sink in over several days and practice it over several days, rather than just having them drill COEs all one day. It might end up being the same amount of hours working on it, but I find that if you spread it out over several days, it kind of helps it log into that longer term. Again, I already talked about it a little bit, but we have our students participate in a sweep and core, or core, I think is what some of the states call it, basically like a group recruitment effort. We purposely plan our group recruitment effort for after the interns start, so that they have time to practice with different staff members and see how things are done. Usually after their first week, maybe 2 of work, we go ahead and decide what their schedule is going to be. Ojo con eso, like, we don't have a hard schedule. Nobody in my head, I feel like, it's a hard schedule. We do let them know. Sometimes they're going to be flexible. There might be weekends when they work. There might be a day of the week where I really need them to go and help out at some, like literacy night event that's technically on a night they would usually have off, but I'm going to compensate them by giving the whole weekend off, whatever it is. So is that like a Sunday through Thursday, Saturday to Wednesday, Monday to Friday? I generally ask them to do Sunday through Thursdays. That would be Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for outreach, because Sunday is such a good outreach afternoon and evening. And then they can do a half day on Thursday, just to like catch up on whatever kind of paperwork they need to turn in to me. We have our like little one-on-ones and group catch-ups and all that kind of stuff on those half days on Thursday. But again, they can, you kind of have to work with them in your program and see what works best for you. Obviously, you want to keep it fun. I know I've been talking about a lot of things you can and can't do and should and shouldn't do, but in the end, you want to also make sure that they have a good time. Have little milestone celebrations as they complete their internships. So whether that's, even just quickly shouting them out in the car or in your group chat or in the emails or something like that, being like, hey, so-and-so filled out their first COE today, woo, or the interns taught their first class tonight. They did a really great job. We're telling them that in the car. Like, I'm so proud of y'all. Do y'all realize y'all just conducted your first evening of outreach without me having to help you? Y'all did so great, whatever it is. If they happen to have like a birthday while they're with you, making sure they know that. This picture of these interns, 3 of the 4 of them had a birthday while they were with us this summer, and then one of them didn't. So we had her unbirthday one day just because I didn't want her to feel left out. So just try to think of things like that you can do. If none of them have a birthday or only one of them does, you don't have to celebrate their birthdays, but just trying to figure out what you can do to like keep their internship fun and make them feel, maybe do a little field trip. Like if we're going to go out to this camp tonight, let's just go 20 minutes early and I can show you all this pretty walking trail or lake or something like that, just so they also enjoy their time with you and they're not just exhausted. Try to model yourself enjoying it and practicing self-care. So like, great, the weekend's here, see you ladies Sunday afternoon. Like, unless it's an emergency, don't even try to call me after Thursday because I'm going to be like enjoying my weekend or whatever. So they know that it's important for you to also, you're doing it, they should do it. Same thing for just enjoying yourself on outreach, whether that looks like letting them, maybe if they feel comfortable with you and aren't shy, DJing y'all's outreach evening or whatever it is and getting into the music they like, or if they like listening to funny stuff on the radio, whatever it is, to kind of show like you having a good time out of the class, talking to the families, talking to the students, so they can see like, yeah, it's a tough job and it's a hard job, but it can also be really fun. Make sure you have some sort of send off at the end of their time with you. Again, I realize it's going to vary a lot by your organization and what kind of funding y'all don't have for that kind of thing. But make sure you do something, whether it's a little picnic, pizza party, maybe y'all all go to the beach on a hike, a day inside in the air conditioning, whatever it is, but some little way of saying, hey, thanks, I see you, and also recognizing them as individuals. So it might look like you ask the staff to vote on superlative awards for them, or you ask all the staff to go around and say something that they thought was really special about each intern, or have the intern share like their favorite memory from the summer. Anything you can do to just kind of help like wrap around the end of that. And I keep saying summer because that's when we get most of our interns, but whether that's school year or whatever that is. And make sure that you encourage them to use their talents that they may have to keep the joy going. So that could be artistic, like they're really good at painting, drawing. I had an intern last summer who was really into both art and science. So she was awesome. So she did so many STEAM projects with our students and families. Maybe they know how to play an instrument. We had some interns too one year go out and bring their guitars. And so they did kind of English singing lessons with a lot of our OSY, and then just let the OSY play the guitars and hang out and talk. Some of them are just funny. Like one of these ladies here who's in the dark hair with a black shirt, Patricia was one of my first interns, and she was hilarious. So even just like letting her cut up and make jokes with the guys, especially like those OSY classes, maybe they're really good with young kids, but they're not as great with the high school age kids. Maybe they're really good with the high school age kids and not as good with the young ones. Just try to figure out kind of what are their talents and help them to figure out how to use them and how to shine as well when you're just trying to keep it fun and nice. So I'm going to let y'all ask some questions now. What questions do y'all have? What comments do you have? Did you all fall asleep? Hopefully the sound was okay.
You sounded just fine.
Okay, good. Does anybody like use interns at their, I'm assuming y'all all came to the session for a reason. Is there anything that you're working on with interns that you want to talk about, or something that you feel like y'all do well in your state when it comes to managing interns, or a question that maybe I haven't covered in here where you're like, gosh, you never did talk about whatever. And I really want to know that because that's something we're struggling with when it comes to either receiving interns, having a good internship program, remembering why we bothered to apply for interns in the first place.
You're so quiet today.
Hi, Emily. This is Rachel from New Hampshire. I just wanted to say that we don't use interns, but we have for many years now used AmeriCorps volunteers. And so for like a price match stipend kind of thing, we get a full-time worker, and they've been so instrumental to keeping our program alive. Yeah.
Absolutely. South Carolina migrant ed summers would look real different without interns. I can tell you that for sure. I would be way more insane.
There's a comment there from Alejandro on the chat.
Yeah, you're talking about maybe doing the same thing in Kansas, which we would love it. Alejandro, you would be a great intern supervisor. When you say work under FERPA, I mean, I do as part of their onboarding, we do a training on FERPA, like through the Department of Ed, they have like, whatever. And so we talk about FERPA, but then we also talk about, because part of them learning how to fill out a COE and learning how to recruit is learning how to explain FERPA to parents. Because if you tell parents like, oh, and like, just so you know, your child's information is like protected under the FERPA laws, the parents will just be like, and if you're like, what is FERPA? And they're like, I don't know. So part of our training too is making sure that they understand FERPA well enough that they can explain it in a relatable way, especially for some of our families and students who might not have any formal education or have very little formal education. So that's kind of what we do, and just making sure that the students truly understand like what information they're allowed to share as they're going along, as part of their onboarding. Just make sure they realize, which sounds ridiculous, and luckily for us, we've never had this issue before. But like, these are real students. These are real families. You can't share pictures of these students and families on your personal Instagram, or at least not without very express permission from those students and families. You can't tell their stories without their permission. It's their stories to tell. Luckily, our interns come from, I think, a place where they're taught very quickly, if they don't already kind of have it intrinsically, to have a deep respect for the privacy of our students and families and for their dignity. But it is something that I touch on at the very beginning in their onboarding, is not only what does the law say about FERPA, but what does that ethically mean when talking about farm working students and families, and like how does that help us guide? It's not just like a checkbox, yeah, FERPA. It's like this really does have implications as well, just in general, for being respectful of the families and students we're working with this summer. Does that answer your question, or did you have a more specific FERPA question that maybe I'm like now on recording realizing that I don't understand? Is there some specific issue that you're concerned about? Community service hours. Yeah. Okay. Your high school students who are migrant students, or just general high school education, like high school students who are trying to volunteer with y'all to get their community service hours? Which one do you? Migrant students. That's so interesting. I have a whole separate side rant, which again, always dangerous to let me go on recordings because I have no filter. But I have a whole separate side rant about asking migrant students to do a bunch of community service hours, where I'm like, they already run an after school program. It's called getting the younger kids off the bus, making dinner, keeping the house clean, getting those other kids tutored. Like, those kids already do so much like community service. It just isn't like, it just drives me bananas. But anyway, what are you trying to say?
I was thinking that maybe we can offer community service hours as a change of their services and work together, so they will continue working after graduation or when the senior year, continue helping. And pretty much our job is, our problem is the language. There's so many languages we have. Those kids have the language, but the other side, the problem is they're living in the same community, and as they ask questions to the family, they will know information that is no shareable, and that's my liability concern. That's how to train them, or what kind of task give it to them to protect themselves and protect the families.
No, that is a really good. That's a great idea to get ISOC to do a whole thing about like working with high school students to get their training, like their community service hours, and explaining FERPA to them, and kind of figuring out, because yeah, you're right. That's another thing that's easier about us getting these interns from student action farm workers. They're almost never from, even if they're from farm working backgrounds, they might be from Idaho or something like that. So the chances of like, oh, I go to high school with this kid, I've never had that specific issue before. So that would definitely require, I think you're right, and maybe might not even be worth the risk. That is definitely something to think about.
Most of the high schools are requiring a number of high school, community service hours, and our kids do the mobility. They just came late, and it's hard for them to find areas to complete the hours. So we can provide those additional hours, and at the same time, they know other kids in the same communities. They can refer to us. So as they are connected to us, working, making copies or the sending flyers or contacting, they're just driving flyers on the apartment complexes. That's going to be great. And at the same time, they can send us some friends that play soccer with them, or they're just in the same classroom, and maybe we can just identify them.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. It looks like we're up with the time. And go ahead, Emily, if you had anything else.
Oh, I just like to end on the right notes, right? Just closing reminders with interns, plan, I do, we do, you do. Utilize feedback and creativity, be flexible and creative yourself. Make sure they're getting their part out of it, and make sure that y'all are having fun. And I'm going to leave my contact information here. Seriously, I'm very happy to like call and chat with you, text you, email you, like we can Zoom, whatever. If y'all want to talk about troubleshooting or talk more about something specific you're trying to do anytime.
Great. And just a reminder, everybody, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. is our first session, and it will be, it's called Overview of California Farm Work, H2A, Drought Mechanization, and how it affect all of the US. So that starts at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. So we hope to see you here, and thank you so much for participating. Thank you, Emily, so much. And this was very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.